G'day everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over every single AFL team in the competition and judging whether they hit their expectations, exceeded their expectations, or did not hit their expectations of the 2022 season. If you're going to enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. That'd be much appreciated. And let's get into the video. Righto everyone, here we are on the tier maker. I haven't been on tier maker for quite some time, so finally back on it to do today's video, and it is quite simple. We'll go over each team and judge whether they either exceeded their expectations, hit them, or did not meet them. Of course, for each club, it is quite different, depending if you're the Crows, who maybe wanted to be out in the bottom four, for the Ds, wanting to continue a top four spot. It's all different, and we'll go over the teams in alphabetical order, of course, starting off with the Adelaide Crows, and I feel like they did hit their expectations this year. It's a side that maybe a lot of people, including myself, had them for a bottom four side, but just considering that I feel like Crows fans and the club itself are quite positive that they are going into a bit of a slow rebuild. They're wanting to progressively incline their performance year by year, and they've finished out of the bottom four, finishing on 14th with 8 wins. That's a really solid season. They've been competitive all year. They've gotten really good output of a few of their personnel players, like terrific first years from 𝐼𝐴𝐴 and Rochelle, and of course you can't forget 𝗬𝐼𝐴𝐴. He looks like a player that could potentially kick 50 goals the next season. Laird and Keys, of course, guns players too. So I believe they have hit their expectations. They were a side that really wanted to push out of the bottom four, and they sure did that this year. Move on now to the Brisbane Lions, an interesting one here. Would you put them on didn't meet expectations because they didn't make the top four this year, or would you put them on hit expectations, just give them the benefit of the doubt? Because I still believe that even though they played some poor games this year, they look like easily a top four side. So I feel like they did hit their expectations this year. They didn't make the top four though, so it may be in between sort of. They might even go first week out of finals, who knows? But I feel like they've still had really strong performances this year. Have looked like a terrific forward half side. They've been a very strong contested side for a number of games, but they've let plenty of games slip. So I feel like, you know, they're still in the hunt for a premiership. So I feel like they just have slightly hit their expectations in a few aspects. Moving on to Carlton now. Of course, we all know their expectations is to make finals, and they were in finals for every single week of this season. And in the last round of this year, they just missed out, finishing ninth. The first time that's happened in quite some time, since the 70s, I do believe. So quite simply put, you know, it's harsh, but it's true. They didn't make their expectations this year. They wanted to make finals football. They were unable to, but of course, that's down in Carlton a bit too much. They've still produced a fantastic season. They were 8-2 halfway through the year, pretty much. Their midfield was absolutely bossing it. You know, throughout the whole year, they were still a very strong contested side. They just had a lot of transition, poor ball skills, and a lot of poor defensive mistakes that cost them games. But yeah, they just didn't make their expectations once again this year. Didn't make the top 8, simple as that. Moving on now to Collingwood, and it is quite obvious here. They, of course, exceeded their expectations, probably the most out of any club in the competition, all thanks to baby Craig McRae. He just allowed the side to play with a lot more freedom, and look how they are playing now. Just free-flowing football, attacking, fast, fun to watch. High pace through the corridor, pressure's been awesome. They haven't really gotten the stat differentials they want to, but just how they managed to keep themselves in games, so strong belief. Of course, they've exceeded their expectations this year. A side that was predicted to be bottom 2, be a wooden spooner, be a bottom 4, and they've made the top 4 this year. Of course, the Pies have exceeded their expectations. Move on now to Essendon, and of course, they did not meet their expectations for 2022. Managed to sneak into the finals last year after a really strong, probably final 5-6 game sort of burst, which allowed them to make finals last year, and a poor Elam final loss, and this year they just have not been it. A lot of players that they've had a few injury problems, like Parrish being out and Stringer being out, but of course, you know, they're a side that really, at worst, probably to finish mid-table, but they just were poor this year, finishing 15th with 7 wins. And now their head coach is sacked, the president's resigned, their CEO's resigned. They've just got major problems at the footy club at the moment, and of course did not meet their expectations whatsoever. Moving on now to Fremantle, and I believe their expectations this year was to just continue to increase their ladder position. I reckon their expectations was also to hit finals, and they sure did that, and were really unlucky to miss out on a top 4 position. They really look like a top 4 side throughout the most of this year. Of course, I believe that they are a really underrated side in terms of their youth core. They've been slowly really having a strong rebuild, in my opinion. Heath Chapman, Hayden Young, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐎𝐥𝐝, of course, Andy Brayshaw too, Bailey Banfield, just all these low-key kind of players, O'Driscoll as well. I think they've got a really underrated list, and they managed to finish 5th where they really could have finished top 4. So, of course, they've exceeded expectations in my eyes. Understandable they had a few mid-season, a few slumps here or there, which cost them top 4 spots, but, of course, they've still exceeded their expectations this year. They've had a fine year, the Dockers. Move on now to the Cutters, and this is a bit of a debatable one, really. I feel like a few people could put the Cats in exceeded expectations, because I feel like pundits and also fans agreed that the Cats could maybe struggle for top 4, let alone top 8. But just considering that, I feel like inside the 4 walls of the Cats footy club, and even Chris Scott said they were strong believers they would be another really red-hot crack for the flag this year. Chris Scott said at the start of the year they're really bullish about they can win the flag this year, and they managed to finish minor premiers and the best chance to win the flag this year. So in my opinion, they have truly hit their expectations for 2022. Moving on now to the Gold Coast Suns, and I reckon they have hit their expectations. I do still believe that they are a side that really want to push for finals, of course. They've yet to make finals throughout their whole lifetime, the Gold Coast Suns. But I feel like it's more than just making finals. They really want to look for improvement. They've had a lot of poor seasons where they've just been heavily inconsistent. They showed that a bit this year, but still they achieved the highest win count out of any season throughout the whole lifespan. The Gold Coast Suns finishing 12th with 10 wins. They had terrific performances, major scalps with many games. Of course, dropped a few. Interstat haven't been too hot, so they have been a little bit inconsistent, but still they've had their lifetime best year, I guess you could say, the Suns. So for me, they've hit their expectations, but of course the expectations for next year, you reckon, would be pushing for finals. Now for the Giants, quite simply put, made finals last year. Another similar to Essendon, really. Had a really good second half of the year that managed them to make finals, won a finals game, and then were struggling this whole year, really, only managing to win 6 games, finishing 3rd last. Of course, did not meet their expectations. Head coach resigns, interim coach in, Adam Kingsley now the new coach. Yeah, it's just not been their year. The Giants, it's a bit of an odd one, really, because the Giants, they have a really good list on paper, but they just had a few injury problems, a few players that really weren't playing to their standards or punching above their weight, and quite simply put, they did not meet their expectations for 2022. Moving on now to the Hawks, and I believe they exceeded their expectations this year. A lot of people, including myself, had the Hawks to get the wooden spoon, or at least finish bottom 2, and they absolutely proved me wrong, finishing 13th with a grand total of 8 wins for the season, which I think is absolutely awesome for the Hawks. They were one of the youngest sides in the comp, one of the quote-unquote worst lists on paper to have in the competition. First-year coach, all things aligning for them to finish in the bottom 4. They didn't do that. They finished 13th. Had some really good games this year, played really competitive. I feel like Hawks, they're building nicely. I think it's a really positive season for them, not finishing bottom 4. They aren't going to get the pick they quite want, because I feel like for them to improve, they've got to really heavily invest in the draft, in my opinion. They'll get Carl Amon in. Hopefully, they can get Gunston and Bruce. Yeah, just keep on investing in the draft. They've been really, just solid this year, I reckon, the Hawks. They've exceeded their expectations. Moving on now to the Melbourne Demons, and quite obvious one, they have hit their expectations. They are, of course, wanting to push for back-to-back flags. Managed to finish in the top 4, finishing 2nd this year. Yeah, pretty obvious they have hit their expectations. Now for North Melbourne, another year, another wooden spoon finish. 2 years in a row now they have taken home the wooden spoon. And I feel like they're a very optimistic club, North Melbourne. They're really wanting to push out of the bottom 4. I feel like they really want to achieve that, or at least achieve a lot more wins. But not only that, I feel like they just wanted, the base thing was to really see somewhat improvement out of their list this year. And I feel like for a majority of the year, they did not see that. You can make an exception for like Luke Davies-Uniacke, who had a standout year. But just a few players like Taron Thomas and Simpkin and Ben Mackay, yeah, they've been very good this year, but I just feel like a team as a whole, they haven't really contributed enough. Plenty of games this year, they've looked absolutely poor, look like a VFL side at times, conceded high amounts of scores, plenty of 100-point concedings. For me, they didn't meet their expectations. I felt like they really wanted to push out of the bottom 2 or get a few more wins, but they only had 2 wins this year. They did not meet their expectations, North Melbourne. Now for Port Adelaide, the prelim finals from last year, they didn't meet their expectations. It's quite obvious. They finished 11th with only 10 wins for the season. Again, they're a side that has quite a decent list. Of course, Charlie Dixon was out for the first 6 or 7 weeks, and I feel like he's a very, very important player for Port Adelaide, structure-wise. They're struggling without him, which left Marshall and Geordie Artis really isolated. Finlay's had a poor start to the year, but they eventually got things going. After the 0-5 start, they looked like a finals quality side. They had a strong record. They were playing really a lot more competitive. Their contested game was getting up there. Defense was very good too. But just, considering the players like Wines and 𝐼𝙗𝙪, Charlie Dixon, also Travis Boken there, just a lot of those class players from last year, they just didn't really meet their expectations this year, those types of plays. And as a whole, the footy club, 𝐻𝐿 𝐿 under the pump sort of as well. Through the Port Adelaide fans, they didn't meet their expectations this year, quite obviously, Port Adelaide. Moving on now to Richmond, I feel like this one's a bit of a debatable one. I can definitely see people putting Richmond under the exceeded expectations tier, but in my opinion, I reckon they've hit their expectations. I feel like last year was a bit of a one-off. I was a very firm believer they would finish in the top 8 this year. I had them predicted 6th, they finished 7th, and they are the sleeping giants to potentially win another flag this final series. Just I felt last year they had a lot of injury problems. Of course, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 you can blame as well. Preston, Dusty Martin were injured alongside a few of their veteran players, which really exposed their youth last year. But since they got plenty of experience, they drafted well in the off-season. The Tigers, they recruited well, bringing like Robbie Tarrant in, for example. I feel like they've had a strong year, the Tigers, and I still feel they are a really good footy side. They really could have finished higher. They just were on a lot of wrong sides of results throughout this year, so they could have really been a top 4 side this year, but I feel they have hit their expectations for 2022. Now for 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐿𝐴, I feel like they are quite similar to Carlton, just a mid-table side, really pushing for a top 8 spot, and they were unable to do that this year. Really strong half to the first half of the season. I think they won 5 games in a row, looked really solid looked really firm in the top 4, then just kept on slipping, lost consecutive games in a row. And I feel like the first half of their season, the bottom 6 kind of players, or the role players, were really punching above their weight, which allowed them to play some tremendous footy. The team was in form, but they've just really struggled to find consistency, the Saints. I feel like they sort of treat this season like a sprint, not a marathon. A few of their role players just weren't giving enough, and you could see they were getting on the wrong end of results quite convincingly. I think their ball skills were quite poor. Defense was quite inconsistent. Another inconsistent year for the Saints. I feel like, they want to make finals. They want to be better than that. You could maybe put them under hit expectations because the first half of the season was that promising, but I feel like you got to be quite harsh with a few of these decisions. I don't think they met their expectations, considering they did not make finals football. Move on now to the Sydney Swans. Look, I can definitely agree putting the Swans under exceeded expectations or hit expectations. But I just feel like they're a side that year by year, I reckon they're going to slightly get better and better and better alongside their growing list of plenty of exciting names and young players in there too. So I reckon they have hit their expectations. They were a predicted top 4 side, managed to finish the top 4. The players are just progressively improving. Dylan Stephens, for example, Errol Goulden, and who else is in there? Chad Warner too. Just plenty of players that have had tremendous years. I reckon the Swans have hit their expectations. Now for the Eagles, quite simply put, they did not meet their expectations whatsoever. Had their worst record in club history, only notching up 2 wins for the season. And for a side that looked quite promising for finals last year, just missed out, finishing 9th to finish 17th this year. Have just injury woes in the preseason, a lot of COVID outs. But then, when that got out of the way, just for the rest of the season, they would just look really lethargic, had poor ball skills, have a really lack of, elite talent in terms of their play stocks. They just really need to start investing in the draft, of course, after they've just traded out so many picks. So, yeah. Quite simply put, Eagles have not met their expectations. And for the final side, we have, of course, the Western Bulldogs, the grand finalists from last year. How they were so good last year was they were just simply the best midfield in the competition, I do believe, just behind Melbourne, you could say. So good in the contested game, but this year they were just too inconsistent. They really started to get beat in their own game of contested ball. McRae and Bontempelli and Dunkley had a lot of games where they just fell off the cliff, weren't really rising up to the occasion. And of course, their defense, were not really contributing enough for them to pick up results. They just managed to sneak them to finals, and you still question how the Bulldogs did make finals. Of course, you don't want to down them too much, credit to them. But just considering, you know, they were a side that really wanted to continue to make finals, or push up, into the top 6 or the top 4 again, weren't able to do that. So I feel like they didn't really meet their expectations. Carlton really, I guess, could have won that game. It was as simple as that. If Carlton got on the right end of the result, they wouldn't have made finals, the Bulldogs. So I feel like you can't really look at the Carlton game thinking, oh, you know, Carlton, if they won that game, would put them at hit. If they didn't meet, you know, etc. So I feel like the Bulldogs did not meet their expectations. Way too inconsistent this year. Had a lot of positional errors. You know, defense was just not good enough. Midfield was getting beaten in their own game too much. Forward line, you know, had good games, had bad games. Managed to sneak in the finals, but they expected a lot better, the Bulldogs, so they did not meet their expectations. Okay, everyone, there is the tier list in terms of teams' expectations. We only have 3 sides in exceeded expectations: Collingwood, Fremantle, and Hawthorn. Of course, maybe we could shuffle a few things around. Like, for example, maybe am I too harsh on Carlton? Could I put them at hit expectations, or St Kilda, for example? But I feel like, in my opinion, these are a few of them are harsh but true selections. So feel free, fellas, to comment down below and let me know what you think of my tier list, and I'd love to hear your fellas thoughts down below too, and give me your thoughts on maybe would you move a few teams around. So everyone, that is the end of today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. Feel free to like and subscribe if you wanted to enjoy today's video, and until next time, I'll talk to you later. See you later, fellas.